We gather online this evening, separated yet together, to pray, to praise, to turn inward and reevaluate our deeds. As we beat our breasts, we seek forgiveness from God, from others, and from ourselves. We have tuned in to listen to the stirring sounds of Kol Nidre and perhaps to sing along. But though we may be physically distant, we are here in spirit with our family and our loved ones, people we may have hurt during the past year, people toward whom we've been callous and inattentive, but who love us nonetheless. Though distant from each other, we are aware that we are still a community, sharing a common history and united by a common destiny, and a desire to deepen our commitment to God and to the Jewish people. We are surrounded by people we may not be able to see, but whose presence we sense. Parents and grandparents, aunts and uncles, brothers and sisters, partners and children who are not with us. We are also joined by those whose names are forgotten, martyrs of past generations who were robbed of the opportunity to mark another Yom Kippur, and whose lives were cut short by hatred and intolerance. They too are here. And finally, we are joined by our better selves, the self we have failed to be in the past year, the self that we hope to become in the year ahead. Our better self is present as we recite Kol Nidre, judging us and challenging us, and inspiring us to try harder, and calling on us to reflect on the year gone by and the one that is just beginning. Almighty God, as we begin in prayer and repentance, we come to seek you and to seek one another. We enter searching for the better self that we might become. Open our hearts to the present and the past and to your presence. Help us learn from our failures and to grow from our successes. As we begin another Yom Kippur, may we find our way to you and to one another so that we can find true atonement and become our better self. Maimonides, the Rambam, wrote in his Mishnah Torah, "Whoever merely verbalizes his confession without consciously deciding to give up his sins is like a person who immerses in a ritual pool in a mikveh in order to cleanse himself, but is holding a dead lizard in his hand. His immersion will not cleanse him as long as the reptile remains in his hand." We read together on page 203, the left side, "I hereby forgive." I hereby forgive all who have hurt me, all who have done me wrong, whether deliberately or by accident, whether by word or by deed. May no one be punished on my account. As I forgive and pardon fully those who have done me wrong, may those whom I have harmed by word or by deed forgive and pardon me, whether I acted deliberately or by accident. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be acceptable to you, my rock and my redeemer. We continue now as we rise for the chanting of Kol Nidre, beginning on page 204 and then going to 205.
B'yeshiva shamala, u'b'yeshiva shamata, al dat hamakom v'al dat hakahal, anu matirim להתפלל עם עבריינים. Kol Nidre v'yasareh v'charameh v'konameh v'chinuyeh v'kinuseh u'shavot dindarna u'deishtevana u'deacharimna v'diasana shatana miyom kippurim zeh ad yom kippurim haba aleinu יהון שרן שוויקין שוויקין בתהילין מבוטלין אוי לה שרירין ולא קיימין נדרנה לא נדרה ושרנה לא שרה ושבועתנה לא שבועות Kol Nidre v'yasara v'charame v'koname v'chinuye v'kinuse u'shavot dindana Udeshtvana Udiacharimna V'diasarna Al nafshatana Miyom Kippurim Ad Yom Kippurim Abaleinu letova Kol hom Icharatna v'hon Kol hom Yehon sharan Shvikin Shvitin B'teilin Mutalin La Sheririm La Kayamin Nidrana La Nidre Vesarana La Sarai Ushavuatana La Shavuot Kol Nidre v'yasare v'charame v'koname v'chinuye v'kinuse u'shavot Dindarna Udeshtvana Udiacharimna V'diasarna Anavshatana Miyom Kippurim Ad Yom Kippurim Abaleinu letova Kol Icharat Navahom Kol Yehon Sharan Shvikin Shvitin B'Teilin Mavotalim Oilag Sheririn V'Lakayamin Nidrana La Nidre V'Sarana La Esarai Ushavotana La Shavot B'nei Slach L'chol Adat B'nei Israel V'lager Hagar B'tocham Ki L'cholam Bishkaga Slach Na'olam Hazeh K'godel Chastecha V'chasher Nasat Olam Hazeh Mimitzrayim V'ad Heina V'sham Nehemar Vayomer Adonai Salachti Kidvarecha Vayomer Adonai Salachti Kidvarecha Vayomer Adonai Salachti Kidvarecha Oy Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Shehechianu v'kiyamanu v'higianu lazman hazeh.
Our sages tell us that the first time Adam saw the sun go down, he was terrified. He had seen day, but had never experienced the night. So Midrash tells us that God took pity on Adam and gave him 2 stones to rub together in order to create fire. The name of one stone was Afelah, darkness, and the other Mavet, death. As the spark emerged, Adam said, "Blessed be the creator of light." Out of darkness and death, the first human being realized that we can create light. On these high holy days, we think back over the difficulties and even the tragedies that have befallen us in the past year. We have lost people we love, done things we regret, been hurt and saddened by life. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur arrive to remind us that our task in this world is to strike a spark, to carry light in the shadows. We work in the dark, do what we can, give what we have. We all work in darkness, unknowing, uncertain. But if we do what we can, our passion can ignite each other's souls. Light does not erase difficulty or doubt or even death, but it does allow us to seek blessing. So as we bless these holy day candles, we add the blessing of Adam, the first human being. Blessed be God who grants us memory and gives us light. I'm now going to be lighting the candles, and those of you at home may wish to do so along with me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu v'hadlik ner shel yom hakippurim. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shehecheyanu v'kiyamanu v'hiyanu lazman hazeh.
Amen.
Creation's brightest light, the mystics say, was hidden at the dawn of time. But on this sacred night, this night of hope and joy, a glimmer of that light is here among us. In candles' flame and children's eyes, in eyes aglow with wisdom's light. It shines in the faces of the ones we love, in grateful hearts, in tears of loss. It lives in memories of goodness and in our own desire to do right, to try again, to build anew, to ask forgiveness and make peace. We enter this new year and look upon the beauty of these lights. So may these days of awe, these Yamim Noraim, renew the light within each one of us. We continue now with the Marav service, page 207.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher tzivarav ma'ariv aravim. Umavir yom, umevi layla, umavdil ben yom v'ben layla, Adonai tzavot shemo, echai v'kayom, tamid yimloch aleinu le'olam va'ed, Baruch atah Adonai, Amariv Aravim. Ahavat Olam Beit Yisrael Amcha Ahavta, Torah u'mitzvot chukim u'mishpatim otanu limadeta. Al kein Adonai Eloheinu b'shachveinu v'kumeinu nasiach b'chukecha v'nismach b'divrei Toratecha u'v'mitzvotecha le'olam va'ed ki hem chayenu v'yorech yameinu uvahem nega yomam v'layla v'yavatcha al tashem imenu le'olamim Baruch atah Adonai ohev amo Yisrael Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed V'yahavta et Adonai Elohecha B'chol levavcha v'chol nafshecha v'chol meodecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavcha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta bam v'shivtecha b'veitecha u'lechtecha b'derech v'shachpacha u'hukumecha u'kshartam leot al yodecha v'hayu letotafot bein einecha u'chtavtam al mezuzot beitecha u'visharecha.
We continue individually at the top of page 209. We chant together from the middle of page 209.
Vayomer Adonai el Moshe lemor, daber el bnei Yisrael v'yomerta alehem, v'yasu lahem tzitzit al kanfei bigdeihem ledorotam, v'natnu al tzitzit hakanaf til techelet, v'yalachem letzitzit uritem oto. Uzchartem et kol mitzvot Adonai, v'asitem otam, v'lo taturu, acharei levavchem v'acharei einechem, asher atem zonim achareihem, leman tizkeru, v'asitem et kol mitzvotai, v'tem kadoshim leloechem, ani Adonai Elohechem. Asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim, liot lachem le'Elohim, ani Adonai Elohechem, Adonai Elohechem, Amen. ומלכותו לרצון קיבלו עליהם משה ומרים ובני ישראל. מלכותך ראו בניך בהוקי הים לפני משה זה עליונו ויאמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד ונאמר כי פדה אדוני את יעקב וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל.
A story is told about General George Patton of World War II fame. He was once invited to dine at press camp in North Africa. Wine was served in canteen cups, but thinking he was being served coffee, Patton poured cream and sugar into his cup. As he stirred the sugar, the waiter told him that his cup contained wine, not coffee. Too proud to admit that he'd made a mistake, Patton replied without hesitating, "I know, I like my wine this way." And then he drank it. This is a story for Yom Kippur because it's hard for all of us to admit when we've made a mistake. We think it would reflect badly on us if we were ever to admit that we'd done wrong. And therefore, 3 of the hardest words in the English language are, I was wrong. We stutter and stumble and we mumble when we have to say them. And yet they are 3 of the most ennobling words we can ever say. When we say I was wrong, we break down the barriers between ourselves and others, and we create a climate in which love and respect can grow. When we say I was wrong, we are not saying that we are basically bad, only that we are honest. To say I was wrong is not a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. Poor General Patton had to drink wine with sugar and cream in it because he was unable to say these 3 words. We sometimes have to drink the cup of loneliness and distrust because we do what he did. May we lie down in peace, but perhaps only if we're able to say those words. We continue with Hashkivenu, page 211.
Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu leshalom. Ushmar tzeiteinu uvoeinu לחיים ושלום מעתה ועד עולם. ופרוס עלינו סוכת שלומך, ברוך אתה אדוני, הפורש סוכת שלום עלינו ועל כל עמו ישראל ועל ירושלים.
Amen. Please rise if you're able. Page 212, where we recite the announcing of the Yom Kippur festival.
כי ביום הזה יכפר עליך לטהר אתכם מכל חטאותיכם לפני אדוני תטהרו.
May be seated. One Kol Nidre Eve, the great philosopher Franz Rosenzweig visited a synagogue as a last-minute gesture to affirm his decision to convert to Christianity. That experience so stirred him that he decided instead to study Judaism intensely and became one of the leading Jewish thinkers of this past century. Just after that experience, he wrote a letter to a friend in which he said, "After prolonged and thorough examination, I have reversed my decision. It no longer seems necessary to me, and therefore, being what I am, I will remain a Jew. But one thing this Yom Kippur has done for me is that it has made me ask myself the question of how much have I grown? How tall can I become spiritually? Every Kol Nidre night for the rest of my life, I shall always ask myself that question. How much have I grown? How tall am I spiritually?" On this Yom Kippur, let us ask ourselves, how much have I grown this year? Have I accepted my destiny as a unique creature of God, or did I flee from my own greatness? As Rabbi Morris Adler said, our prayers are answered not when we're given what we ask for, but when we are challenged to be what we can be. We rise for the silent Amidah, pages 213 through 221. Usually, Larry Paul does the singing and I do the talking, but now I'm going to hand the mic over to Larry to speak on behalf of Tiferet Israel Congregation.
So, Chavra, Gmar Chatima Tova. I want to recognize that in tonight's tefillot, among our congregation are both members of Tiferet Israel as well as non-members. And so my comments are directed to both of you. So this is the annual appeal. No sugarcoating it. But I'm going to try and keep it short, sweet, and to the point. It's not a news bulletin that our shul, like every shul, has a budget, has staff, has costs, and that we rely on support of those in our congregation as members, those of you who are attending tonight, not members, to help fund all of the activities during the year. Running tefillot, celebrating the holidays, social action committee, men's group, women's group, study sessions, all kinds of things. And particularly acts of gemilut chasadim, acts of loving kindness. There are those, and particularly this year, who will be in difficult situations. And one of the things that we as a community are and practice is essentially functioning as a mutual aid society. We are responsible. Kol Yisrael arevim zeh lazeh zeh bazeh. All of Israel is responsible one for the other. So I'm just going to leave you with two thoughts. I want you to give tzedakah for several reasons. I've already outlined the first reason. If you decide to make that tzedakah contribution to Tiferet Israel, that's great. We can definitely use it. But the second is, and we're going to come to it in tefillot tomorrow morning, at the end of the Natana Tokef, Teshuvah, Tefillah, and Tzedakah will push away the evil decree. Teshuvah, we're doing during these 10 days. Tefillah, we are joining in. Tzedakah is up to each of you. And so I want to make two observations. One, those of you who are members of Tiferet Israel, who heard me at the annual meeting, bear with me as I repeat my comment. So the Kabbalists believe that there are 10 sfirot, 10 emanations from God that provide for our spiritual and physical existence. And Tiferet is the word for beauty. And Tiferet on the chart of these 10 sfirot sits between Chesed and Gvura. Gvura on one side means strength, means severity, means judgment. Chesed on the other side means loving kindness, acts of loving kindness. Tiferet, we are Tiferet Israel, the beauty of Israel. Tiferet is the balance between Chesed and gvura. And so I want to leave you with just this final comment from the book of Micha, from the book of Micah. Uma Adonai doresh mimcha, ki im asot mishpat, va'ahavat chesed, v'hatznea lechet im Elohecha. What is it that God asks of you? To only do justly, acts of chesed, and humbly to walk with God. Gamar Chatima Tova, may we all be inscribed for a good new year. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Larry. We are all grateful to Fereth Israel for opening this service up to the whole community. The story of Robinson Crusoe is familiar to most of us, even if we haven't read Daniel Defoe's early 19th century. The book is presented as an autobiography of the title character, a castaway who spends 28 years on a remote tropical desert island near the coasts of Venezuela and Trinidad, encountering cannibals, captives, and mutineers. Overcoming his despair, he fetches arms, tools, and other supplies from the ship before it breaks apart and sinks. He builds a fenced-in habitat near a cave, which he excavates. By making marks in a wooden cross, he creates calendar. By using tools salvaged from the ship, some of which he makes himself, he hunts, grows barley and rice, dries grapes to make raisins, learns to make pottery, and raises goats. He also adopts a small parrot. Ultimately, of course, he is rescued. If this book were being written today, it might have this ending. One morning, Robinson Crusoe was thrilled to see a ship offshore and a smaller vessel pulling out towards him. When the boat grounded on the beach, the officer in charge handed the marooned sailor a bundle of newspapers and told him, "The captain said, 'Here, read through these and let us know if you still want to be rescued.'" Much less well known than the outlines of the novel is the fact that it was inspired by the true story of a man named Alexander Selkirk, a Scottish castaway who lived for 4 years and 4 months on a Pacific island called Masa Tierra, now part of Chile. According to an 18th century account, he hated even to close his eyes. Often he cursed the folly that had brought him to this terrible solitude, and sometimes, starting up in agony, he would resolve on suicide. Voices spoke to him both in the howlings of the sea in front and in the murmur of the woods behind. The shore was creatured with phantoms. For the first several months after Selkirk's rescue, he could barely carry on a normal conversation. In brief, unlike the hero Robinson Crusoe, whom Defoe depicts as resilient and productive, Selkirk was miserable in his aloneness. What is the first time in the Torah that something is called not good, lo tov? The answer is toward the beginning of Bereshit, of Genesis. It's not good for a human being to be alone. Lo tov heyeh adam levado. Or as in the line from the lyrics of Three Dog Night, one is the loneliest number that you'll ever do. Social isolation has long been used as a form of torture for prisoners of war. Solitary confinement was ironically introduced by Quakers, although they claim to have borrowed it from other faiths, in order to afford the prisoners solitude, to encourage them to examine their behavior and repent of their ways. But the practice has in recent years justifiably received severe criticism for having detrimental psychological effects, even constituting torture. The story is told of the poet Rupert Brooke, who set out to travel by boat from England to America. Everyone on deck had someone there to see him or her off. Everyone, that is, except for him. Rupert Brooke felt lonely. Watching the hugging and kissing and goodbyes, he wished he had someone to miss him. Then the poet saw a youngster and asked his name. "William," the boy answered. "William," he asked, "would you like to earn a few shillings?" "Sure I would. What do I have to do?" "Just wave to me as I leave," the lonely man instructed. It's said that money can't buy love, but for 6 shillings, young William waved to Rupert Brooke as the boat pulled out. The poet writes, some people smiled and some cried. Some waved white handkerchiefs and some waved straw hats. And I had William, who waved at me with his red bandana for 6 shillings and kept me from feeling completely alone. Saying goodbye is hard enough, even without having to do it all by ourselves. When Shoah survivor Aryeh Evan was 12, he escaped deportation to Mauthausen by hiding with his mother and brother in basements and barns. When 88-year-old Aryeh Evan was dying of COVID-19 this past spring in Shaarei Tzedek Hospital in Jerusalem, because of the quarantine, his family could not be with him. Rachel Gamara, his nurse on the ward, saw his last moments. By the grace of God, she wrote, 2 patients acted as angels, rushing to his side. With tears in my eyes, I watched them instinctively place their hands on his eyes and recite the Shema prayer. They comforted him and said goodbye as his holy soul entered the gates of heaven. The prophet Ezekiel portrays Pharaoh as a narcissist who announces, my Nile is my own. I made it for myself. Despite those who claim I alone can fix it, human beings would not choose to die alone, nor to live alone. The Talmud describes a prototype of Rip Van Winkle, a scholar named Honi the Circle Maker, who slept for 70 years. When he woke, a man out of time, he could find no one to study with, and he died. O chevruta o mituta, either companionship or death, the sage Rabbah concludes. Fast forward 2,000 years to Mother Teresa, who used to describe loneliness as the biggest disease of our time. And indeed, researchers have studied loneliness and its consequences for our health. And living alone has been on the increase. A Cygnus study conducted in 2018 revealed that over the past 50 years, the share of United States households consisting of 1 person has more than doubled. Today, it represents the 2nd most common pattern, exceeding married couples with children. Nearly 40% of households in large cities represent single persons. In some neighborhoods here in the Washington, D.C. area, nearly 2/3 of the residents are single-person households. The study indicated high levels of loneliness. Almost half of the 20,000 adults surveyed reported sometimes or always feeling alone or left out. Generation Z and millennials rated themselves highest on feelings associated with loneliness. We often associate loneliness with aging, but counterintuitively, those 18 to 22 felt far more lonely, 48.3%, than those over 72, only 38.6%. 54% said they always or sometimes feel that no one knows them well. Whole lifespan. Chronic loneliness is said to increase the mortality risk about as much as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Socially isolated people are more than twice as likely to die of heart disease. According to medical authorities, loneliness can contribute to diabetes and obesity. In contrast, positive social bonds may even lead to a stronger immune system. So I guess you should join a congregation, right, Larry?
Thank you for working that in.
Yeah. Loneliness impacts our mental health as well. Those experiencing isolation are more stressed, less creative, and feel less in control of their lives. A 2017 study by researchers in Dublin found that adults over the age of 50 who belonged to social communities, participated in social activities, and had support systems were found to have healthier cognitive function, better emotional regulation, processing speed, working memory, and verbal fluency. 2,000 years ago, Pirkei Avot advised succinctly, Al tifrosh min hatzipur, do not separate yourselves from the community. So far I've been speaking of physical loneliness, but there's also what's been called existential loneliness. The human condition is that no matter how close we feel to someone, no other person can know exactly how we're feeling. Empathy can extend only so far. And we all know that feeling. We can feel existentially alone even with someone we love, and even in the midst of a crowd, sometimes especially in the midst of a crowd. It's the truth of the human condition that each of us is created yachid, separate, distinct, unique, and yes, alone. In his book, The Lonely Man of Faith, Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik writes, louder. My husband is telling me louder, can't hear.
Yes, people are complaining it's too small a volume.
Okay.
Can you get
Lean in, Rabbi.
I'll turn her volume up. I'll turn her level up.
Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik writes, the nature of the dilemma can be stated in a 3-word sentence. I am lonely. Let me emphasize, however, that by stating I am lonely, I do not intend to convey to you the impression that I am alone. I, thank God, do enjoy the love and friendship of many. I meet people, talk, preach, argue, reason. I'm surrounded by comrades and acquaintances. And yet companionship and friendship do not alleviate the passionate experience of loneliness which trails me constantly. We are taught that human beings are created in the image of God in an aspirational sense. As God feeds the hungry and clothes the naked, so should we. But maybe we are also in the image of God because each of us is like God, unique and also like God, alone. A midrash from the Talmud depicts God crying alone in the inner chamber where even the angels can't enter. There, alone in the inner chambers, God weeps in distress over the pain of the Jewish people. As Soloveitchik writes, in my desolate, howling solitude, I experience a growing awareness that this service to which I, a lonely and solitary individual, am committed is wanted and gracefully accepted by God in God's transcendental loneliness and numinous solitude. The Hebrew poem Chaim Nachman Bialik wrote a poem called Livadi, Alone, depicting the loneliness of a yeshiva student representing the Jewish people, casting the presence of God, the Shekhinah, as a bird with a broken wing, mourning her loss through exile of the Jewish people, which the poet calls her only son. Badad badad nisharti, v'hashchina afhi. Alone, I remain alone. The Shekhinah's broken wing trembled over my head. My heart knew hers, her fear for her only son. Driven from every ridge, one desolate corner left in the house of study, she hides in the shadow, and I alone share her pain. Imprisoned beneath her wing, my heart longed for the light. She buried her face on my shoulder, and a tear fell on my page. Dumbly she clung and wept. Her broken wing sheltered me. Scattered to the 4 winds of heaven, they are gone, and I am alone. Though the title of Bialik's poem is Levadi, I am alone, the poet applies that word not to the lonely yeshiva student, symbolizing the Jewish people, but only to the Shekhinah, God's presence. The non-Jewish poet Rainer Marie Rilke likewise expresses God's isolation shared with human beings. Du Nachbar Gott, you God who live next door. If at times through the long night I trouble you with my urgent knocking, this is why. I hear you breathe so seldom. I know you're all alone in that room. If you should be thirsty, there's no one to get you a glass of water. I wait listening, always. Just give me a sign, I'm right here. As it happens, the wall between us is very thin. Why wouldn't a cry from one of us break it down? It would crumble easily. It would barely make a sound. Rilke's God is potentially vulnerable, even needy, and Rilke wants so badly to knock down those walls separating them because he feels that God needs him. But the word alone can have either a negative or a positive resonance. During this time of quarantine, we miss the spiritual satisfaction of gathering for prayer when the synagogue is filled and we're surrounded by voices joined in song. But as my predecessor at Avis Israel, Rabbi Lisfield, used to say, the Avis Israel sanctuary was at its spiritual best, either full or empty. We can experience being alone as painful isolation or as productive solitude. Our Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, demonstrates this difference on a collective level as applied to the Jewish people. In the negative, the book of Lamentations begins by describing the destroyed city of Jerusalem, a symbol of the Jewish people. Echa yashva badad ha'ir rabati am. How lonely lies the city, once so full of people. Contrast this sad image of the Jewish people with the one spoken by the reluctant non-Jewish prophet Bilam, who prophesied, Vayishkon Yisrael betach badad ein Yaakov. And Israel shall dwell in safety, the fountain of Jacob in security. The medieval commentator Rashi explains how being badad alone comes to be a sign of hope, referring to some ideal future time when there will be no need any longer for the Jewish people to gather together for self-protection. Just as the biblical use of the word badad can apply to the Jewish people in directly contrasting ways for good or for ill, so can the human condition of solitude, of being by ourselves, be seen and be used as an opportunity. When we are alone, we can determine to use that time of solitude, whether imposed or chosen, for positive growth. The poet Wordsworth wrote of that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. Winston Churchill, who himself spent about 10 years in political exile after World War I, once wrote that as one's fortunes are reduced, one's spirit must expand to fill the void. Every prophet has to come from civilization, but every prophet has to go into the wilderness. He must have a strong impression of a complex society and all that it has to give. And then he must serve periods of isolation and meditation. This is the process by which psychic dynamite is made. Churchill believed that solitude could create psychic dynamite. Before this time of quarantine, our lives were often filled with outside stimuli, work and leisure, meetings with colleagues and friends, family gatherings, sports, and concerts. When former United States Surgeon General Vivek Murthy began writing a book about loneliness, he had no idea large swaths of the United States and the world would be living in social isolation. His book was entitled Together, The Healing Power of Human Connection in a Sometimes Lonely World. Murthy worried that social media and technology have taken over what he calls the white space in people's lives, those moments where people have interacted, the bus stop, in the doctor's office, before class starts, at the office coffee pot. Instead of having a moment of quiet or a chance to start a conversation with someone, even before the pandemic hit, Murthy believed it had become all about the screens. As the psalmist wrote, Hine matovu manaim shevet achim gam yachad, how good and pleasant it is when we dwell together in unity. Halavai, together in person and not just on Zoom. These days, we frequently hear the expression self-isolation with the negative connotation of avoiding human contact. But the Hebrew word hitbodedut, which can be translated as self-isolation or self-seclusion, has a long history as a Jewish spiritual practice. Hitbodedut comes from the same Hebrew root, badad, the same word used in Lamentations, and that is echa, and by both the biblical prophet Bilam and the modern Hebrew poet Bialik. And not surprisingly, the modern Hebrew word for quarantine is bidud, and also comes from the same Hebrew root. The spiritual practice of hitbodedut was popularized by Rabbi Nachman of Bratslav to refer to an unstructured, spontaneous, and individualized form of prayer and meditation through which one would establish a close personal relationship with God and ultimately see the divinity inherent in all human beings. As Rabbi Soloveitchik wrote, I despair because I am lonely and hence feel frustrated. On the other hand, I also feel invigorated because this very experience of loneliness presses everything in me into the service of God. Rabbi Nachman taught that the best place for hitbodedut is in the forests or the fields. When a person meditates in the fields, all the grasses join in his prayer and increase its effectiveness and power, he wrote. He also suggested practicing hitbodedut in the middle of the night when the desires of the world are at rest. Rabbi Nachman was not the first to practice and advocate hitbodedut. He claimed midrashically that this spiritually productive solitude was also practiced by our ancestors, Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Moshe, David, and the prophets. But we do know that historically secluded meditation practices were encouraged by many of the medieval rabbis, including Avraham Maimonides, the son of the Rambam, and central figures of the Kabbalah like Moses de Leon, Moses Cordovero, and Isaac Luria. The founder of Hasidism, the Baal Shem Tov, encouraged his close disciples to find dveikut, attachment to God, through this practice of aloneness with God. In more contemporary times, the Reform movement has defined hitbodedut as talking to God on our own terms. It suggests that this practice lets us speak our minds and hearts, embrace our vulnerability, and open ourselves to what the universe has to offer. I like to think of hitbodedut as a date night with God, writes Rabbi David Jaffe. Date night is a time when my partner and I go out and just focus on each other. It's a time for us to connect. Just as talking honestly and vulnerably with a friend creates intimacy over time, so I found that hitbodedut can make an abstract and invisible God feel closer to my heart. On these high holy days, we sing V'chol ma'aminim, and all believe. But what about those of us who struggle with belief, who don't always or ever believe, which frankly includes most of us? We can still use solitude to sort out and clarify our challenges, to understand our shlichut, our mission in life, to imagine our hopes and our dreams. We can take that walk in the woods to inspire our better selves. We are living through tough times, but lessons from a much tougher time can offer us guidance, a gauntlet with a gift in it, as Elizabeth Barrett Browning wrote. Viktor Frankl wrote of life during the Shoah. We who lived in concentration camps can remember the men who walked through the huts, comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a person but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. As the song from Carousel says, and sing along with me, I'm sure a lot of you know this. When you walk through a storm, keep your head up high and don't be afraid of the dark. At the end of the storm is a golden sky and the sweet silver song of a lark. Walk on through the wind, walk on through the rain, though your dreams be tossed and blown. Walk on, with hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone. You'll never walk alone. On these high holy days, though we may be physically distant from each other, we are in a sense together. Historians will look back at this as a time when people around the world faced the threat of the same disease. We are together with our fellow Americans who share our concerns about the challenges we face as a country. And on this night of Kol Nidre, we are together with Jews around the world and through history, singing together the same words that Jews who lived before us sang, and those who come after us will also sing. When Natan Sharansky was in solitary confinement in a Soviet prison, his guards taunted him. No one remembers you. No one cares what happens to you. He refused to believe them. Long since free and living in Israel, his message is, remember that you are not alone. We Jews for thousands of years all over the world were scattered, but we always had this feeling that we are part of a big people, great people with our mutual past, our mutual future, and our mutual mission. Sharansky's new book is called Never Alone. In a spiritual sense, then, we are never really alone. We can still imagine ourselves joined, if not by God, then by others, by family and friends, by Jews around the world in whatever time zone, hearing the words of Kol Nidre, perhaps singing along, joined by our fellow human beings, so many living like us, isolated and hoping for an end to this unanticipated nightmare. Long before this time of global pandemic, Sylvia Burstein, who taught me the basics of Jewish Buddhist meditation, compared the human experience to being together, all on an airplane going through turbulence. And at that moment, she says, you're connected to and even love everybody else on that plane because we're all experiencing the same turbulence. Or as comedian Lily Tomlin put it succinctly, we're all in this alone. As human beings, we do experience existential loneliness, and these days of quarantine have extended that existential loneliness to mandated physical separation as well. Yet if we can muster the strength to choose solitude over loneliness, we can gain from it, use it productively to ask ourselves who we really are and what we really want from life. And perhaps we can find comfort in hoping for a future filled with others, simchas and sports events, theater and travel, davening together in live in-person services at synagogue. But until that time, may we try to use our solitude as psychic dynamite. And may we sense, at least sometimes, that we never truly walk alone. And now, as we turn back to our machzor, I share with you a midrash from Shemot Rabbah. Rabbi Pinchas said in the name of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yirmiyahu in the name of Rabbi Chia bar Abba, in the hour that Israel prays, you do not find that everyone prays as one, but rather each and every community prays on its own. This congregation first, and after that another. And after all the congregations have finished all of their prayers, the angel appointed over tefillot, over prayers, gathers up all those prayers that all the congregations have prayed and makes out of them crowns and places them upon the head of the Kadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy Blessed One. Though we may be physically alone on this Kol Nidre evening, may our prayers be woven together as part of that crown. We turn back to our machzor now for Ya'aleh. May our prayers rise up at evening, our pleas arise with the dawn, our songs transform the dusk. Page 223.
Ya'ala tachanunenu me'erev ve'yavo shavatenu miboker ve'yerarinu neinu adarav Ya'ala Koleinu me'erev ve'yavo tzidkateinu miboker v'yera pidyoneinu adarev Ya'ala inuyenu me'erev ve'yavo slichatenu miboker v'yera nakatenu adarev Ya'ala Menusenu me'erev ve'yavo lemano miboker v'yera kippurenu adarev Ya'ala dafkeinu me'erev ve'yavo gileinu miboker v'yera bakashatenu adarev Ya'ala Enkatenu me'erev ve'yavo elecha miboker v'yera eleinu
Paderewski. When the house lights dimmed and a concert was about to begin, a mother returned to her seat and discovered that her child was missing. Suddenly, the curtains parted and spotlights focused on the impressive Steinway on stage. In horror, the mother saw her little boy sitting at the keyboard, innocently picking out "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." At that moment, the great piano master Paderewski made his entrance, quickly moved to the piano and whispered in the boy's ear, "Don't quit, keep playing." Then, leaning over, Paderewski reached down with his left hand and began filling in a bass part. Soon his right arm reached around to the other side of the child. Together, the old master and the young novice transformed what could have been a frightening situation into a wonderfully creative experience. The audience was so mesmerized that they couldn't recall what else the great master played, only the classic "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star." Perhaps that's the way it is with God. What we can accomplish on our own is hardly noteworthy. We try our best, but the results aren't always graceful, flowing music. However, with the hand of the master, our life's work can be truly beautiful. So the next time we set out to accomplish great feats, may we listen carefully, and may we hear the voice of the master whispering in our ear, "Don't quit, keep playing." May we feel God's arms around us and know that God's hands are there helping us turn our feeble attempts into true masterpieces. As clay in the hand of the potter, so are we in your hands, O God of love. Ki hine kachomer, page 227.
Ki hine kachomer beyad hayotzer, ברצותו מרחיב וברצותו מקצר. כן אנחנו בידך, חסד נוצר, לברית הבית, לברית הבית, ואל תפן ליצר, לברית הבית, לברית הבית, ואל תפן ליצר. כי הנה כאבן ביד המסתת, ברצותו אוחז וברצותו מחטט. כן אנחנו בידך, מחיה וממוטט, לברית הבית, לברית הבית, ואל תפן ליצר, לברית הבית, לברית הבית, ואל תפן ליצר. כי הנה כגרזן ביד החרש, ברצותו דיבק לאור וברצותו פרש. כן אנחנו בידך, תמך נברש, לברית הבית, לברית הבית, ואל תפן ליצר, לברית הבית, לברית הבית, ואל תפן ליצר. כי הנה כהגה ביד המלאך, ברצותו אוחז וברצותו שילח. כן אנחנו בידך, אל טוב וסלח, לברית הבית, לברית הבית, ואל תפן ליצר, לברית הבית, לברית הבית, ואל תפן ליצר. כי הנה כזכוכית ביד המזגג,
ברצותו חוגג, וברצותו ממוגג. כן אנחנו בידך, מוחל זדון ושגג, לברית הבית, לברית הבית, ואל תפן ליצר, לברית הבית, לברית הבית, ואל תפן ליצר, כי הנה כירייה ביד הרוקם, ברצותו מיישר וברצותו מעקם. כן אנחנו בידך, אלקנו ונוקם, לברית הבית, לברית הבית, ואל תפן ליצר, לברית הבית, לברית הבית, ואל תפן ליצר. כי הנה ככסף ביד הצורף, ברצותו משגשג וברצותו מצרף. כן אנחנו בידך, ממציא למזור טרף, לברית הבית, לברית הבית, ואל תפן ליצר, לברית הבית, לברית הבית, ואל תפן ליצר.
Continue on page 229 with the davening of the 13 attributes.
כמו שכתוב וירד אדוני בן אדם יצא וימשם ויקרא בשם אדוני ויעבור אדוני על פניו ויקרא אדוני אדוני אל רחום וחנון ערך אפיים ורב חסד ואמת נצח חסד לאלפים נושא עוון ופשע וחטא ונקה וסלח לעווננו וחטאתנו ונחלתנו.
Once an old man lived in his only son's house. Life was cheerful for him since he had his own room and a place for his books and his studying. When it came time for meals, the whole family gathered at the big round dining room table to eat together. The son and his wife treated him well. Soon there was a grandchild, and the old man took great pleasure in watching his grandson grow. He loved to take the child on his lap and tell him stories. As the years went by, the old man's hands began to shake, at first only a little and then all the time. Sometimes he would spill his tea because of his trembling hands, or he would drop a plate. And little by little, his son became more and more impatient with him. One day, as the whole family was sitting at the dinner table, the old man accidentally hit his plate with the soup spoon, and the plate broke, spilling the soup on the tablecloth and onto his lap. His son threw down his spoon and jumped up angrily, shouting, "If you can't eat like a mensch, eat alone. I'm tired of your spilling food on our good tablecloths and breaking our good dishes." The next day, the son brought home a wooden plate. He then set a table in the old man's bedroom using an old sheet as a tablecloth and served him food on the wooden plate. The old man said nothing and ate his meals alone day after day. But to be separated from his family in this way hurt him very much. One day when the son came home from work, he noticed his young child working at a task in the corner. "Well, my big son, what keeps you so busy today?" he asked. "I'm making a plate, carving it from wood all by myself," answered the little boy. His father was surprised. "A plate of wood? What will you use that for? We have such beautiful dishes." And the little boy answered, "I know, Father, but I'm making this plate for you. When you grow old like grandfather, and when your hands begin to shake, well, then I'll have this wooden plate ready to give you in your little room." When the father heard this, he ran to his father and fell to his knees. "Forgive me, my father, forgive me for not showing you the respect and honor due to you." And he wept. The father forgave his son, and that evening the family sat together at the big round table. And as for the old man, he sat at the place of honor. We recite Shema Kolenu, hear our voice, do not cast us off in old age. Al Tashlichenu Le'et Zikna, page 233.
Shema Kolenu Adonai Eloheinu Chos v'rachem aleinu v'kaber barachamim uvratzon et tefilateinu. Hashivenu Adonai Elecha V'nashova Chadesh Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem Hashivenu Adonai Elecha V'nashova Ay Chadesh Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem Chadesh Chadesh Yameinu Kekedem Al tashlicheinu milfanecha v'ruach kodshecha al tikach mimenu Al tashlicheinu li'et zikna kichlot kocheinu al ta'azveinu al ta'azveinu Eloheinu al tachal mimenu asay manu like the Torah v'saneinu v'yeshu manazin Adonai v'neinu L'man shimcha gadol timcha v'toslach lavonenu kakatuv b'divrei kodshecha L'man shimcha Adonai v'salachta lavoni kiravahu.
Another parent-child story. This holiday is filled with parent-child motifs. Avinu Malkeinu, Kianu Amecha. So here's another one. The novel Too Late, the Pharaoh by Alan Paton was a bestseller in its day that depicted the racial turmoil in South Africa. The story centers on a father, Jacob, who could never bring himself to forgive his son, Pieter, for a crime Pieter had committed as a young man. There was, however, one potentially redemptive moment late in their relationship. On Jacob's birthday, Pieter gives his father a book about birds. For one brief shining moment, the two enjoyed a discussion of the phalarope, a South African bird. But it was too little, too late. That one conversation, sweet as it was, could not alone atone for decades of hostility. The phalarope had come too late. Confucius said, "Those who cannot forgive others break the bridge over which they themselves must pass." We continue with Kianu Amecha, page 234. For we are your people and you are our God. We are your children and you are our parent. Page 234.
Eloheinu v'Elohei avoteinu slach lanu mechal lanu kaper lanu ki anu amecha v'yata Eloheinu anu vanecha v'yata avinu anu avadecha v'yata Adonenu anu kahalecha V'yata chelkeinu, anu nachalatecha, v'yata gor aleinu, anu tzonecha, v'yata roeinu, anu charmecha, v'yata notreinu, anu fiulatecha, v'yata yotreinu, anu rayatecha, v'yata dodeinu, anu sgulatecha, v'yata kroveinu, anu amecha, v'yata malkeinu, anu mamirecha, v'yata mamireinu. Only other fun, no matter what comes on in. הנה אנחנו פנים כשאור, אז פנים שור פלום על לפניך, אדוני אלוהינו ואבותינו, צדיקים אנחנו ולא חטאנו, אבל אנחנו ואבותינו חטאנו.
Said Rabbi Naphtali, when I come for judgment before the Kadosh Baruch Hu, God will ask, why weren't you a great scholar? And I'll answer, well, I don't have such a great mind. Then God will ask, why didn't you observe Jewish ritual? And I'll respond, I guess I lack enough discipline. Then God will ask me, why didn't you give tzedakah? And I'll tell God, I was too poor to give. But then when God will ask, so why were you so conceited? Then I won't have an answer. From Yehuda Amichai, the poet. From the place where we are right, flowers will never grow in the spring. The place where we are right is hard and trampled like a yard, but doubts and loves dig up the world like a mole, a plow, and a whisper will be heard in the place where the ruined house once stood. We rise now, if you are able, page 235, for the first of many recitations of our sins. Page 235.
Ay, 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 Ashamnu, Bagadnu, Gazalnu, Diban Dofit. Ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 Havinu, V'hirshanu, Zadnu, Chamasnu, Tafalnu Sheker. Ay, 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 Ya'atznu Ra, Kizavnu, Latznu, Maradnu, Niatznu, ay, 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 Sararnu, Avinu, Pashanu, Sararnu, Kishinu Oref. Ay, 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 Rashanu, Shichadnu, Tiavnu, Ta'inu, Titanu, ay, 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 ay.
May be seated for a moment.
San mitzvotech migdal v'michabelanu v'tatayik rabba aleinu kimet asita v'anachnu hirshanu.
For the novel sins we have sinned before you this year, for not wearing our mask and for wearing our mask below our nose, for hoarding paper goods and for walking in the wrong direction down the aisle in the supermarket, for squeezing the fruit in the grocery store, then putting it back on the shelf, and for touching tableware without first washing our hands, for delaying taking a COVID test to avoid being quarantined, and for leaving our cell phones at home so we couldn't be tracked, for claiming the Wi-Fi was down to explain having missed an 8 a.m. staff meeting, and for using the pandemic as an excuse to binge on Netflix, for checking our email during an online bar mitzvah, and for wearing pajama bottoms to services on Zoom. For all these sins and more, forgive us, pardon us, grant us atonement, and by next year, if not well before, may these sins become obsolete. Kenya, he wrote so on page 237, we rise.
Al chet shechatanu lefanecha b'yones uvratzon, al chet shechatanu lefanecha b'motz halev, al chet shechatanu lefanecha Alachet shechatan lefanecha b'yetzer hara, alachet shechatan lefanecha b'yodim uvelo yodim, v'al kulam Eloha selichot, selach lanu mechalanu kapelanu. Ve'al kulam Eloha selichot, selach lanu mechalanu, selach lanu mechalanu kapelanu. Al chet shechatan lefanecha b'chachash u'b'chazav, al chet shechatan lefanecha b'chapat shocha. Al chet shechatan lefanecha b'einayim ramot, al chet shechatan lefanecha b'yazud metzach. Ve'al kulam Eloha selichot, selach lanu mechalanu kapelanu. Ve'al kulam Eloha selichot, selach lanu mechalanu, selach lanu mechalanu kapelanu. Al chet shechatan lefanecha b'shrikato, al chet shechatan lefanecha b'tlilut. Al chet shechatan lefanecha b'tzumet yad, al chet shechatan lefanecha b'timhon levav, ve'al kulam Eloha selichot, selach lanu mechalanu kapelanu. Ve'al kulam Eloha selichot, selach lanu mechalanu, selach lanu mechalanu kapelanu. Tarachum kabel shavim v'al tshuva merosh yivtachtanu, v'al tshuva inena miyachalot lach.
Page 240. May the one who answers Sarah pass the time of her youth, Abraham on Mount Moriah, Isaac, their son, bound on the altar. Rebekah, as her son, struggled within her. Hu Ya'anenu. May that one answer us. May the one who answered Jacob at Bethel, Leah in her loneliness, Rachel desperate for a child, Joseph abandoned in prison. Hu Ya'anenu. May the one who answered the Hebrew midwives as they stood at the birthing place, Yocheved having faith on the bank of the Nile, the people Israel on the shores of the sea, Moses standing on the slopes of Sinai, Miriam with her well of water. Hu Ya'anenu. May the one who answered Aaron offering incense to God, Pinchas seeking his place above the crowd, the daughters of Zelophehad standing their ground, and those who are righteous, upright, decent, and compassionate, answer us. Hu Ya'anenu. Page 240.
Mishan Lasara Imeno Bezignata Huyanenu Mishan Lavram Avinu Bahara Moria Huyanenu Mishan Yitzchak Benam Kshnekat Al Kabei HaMizbeach Huyanenu Mishan Rivka Beher Yonah Huyanenu Mishanu Yaakov Beitel, Huyanenu. Mishanu Leabanya, Huyanenu. Mishanu Rachel Batzwana, Huyanenu. Mishanu Yosef Beveit Asurim, Huyanenu. Mishanu Lam Yaldot Avriot Alavanim, Huyanenu. Mishanu Yocheved al Sfat Hayar, Huyanenu. Mishanu Lavoteinu Limin Pen al Yam Suf, Huyanenu. Mishanu Moshe B'Chorev, Huyanenu. Mishanu Miriam B'Veira, Huyanenu. Mishanu Laron B'Machta, Huyanenu. Mishanu Lefinchas B'Kumo Mitoch Haida, Huyanenu. Mishanu Livnot Slavcha Damdan Petach Ol Moed, Huyanenu. Mishanu Chol HaTzadikim VaTzadikot VaChasidim VaChasidot VaTmimim VaHatmimot VaYisharim VaHayisharot VaRachmanim VaRachmanayot, Huyanenu.
Physicist Niels Bohr said that he came upon the complementarity principle of quantum mechanics when he thought of the impossibility of considering his son simultaneously in the light of love and in the light of justice. The son just having voluntarily confessed that he'd stolen a pipe from a local shop. Bohr's brooding set him to thinking about the vases and faces in that trick figure. Remember the optical illusion, the ground pictures. You can see only one at a time. And then the possibility of thinking simultaneously about the position and the velocity of a particle occurred to him. Bohr found himself incapable of viewing his son's acts simultaneously through the prisms of justice and love. He could be an affectionate father, inclined to forgive, and he could be an objective, fair-minded judge, aware that wrongdoing must have consequences, but he could not be both at the same time. Human beings are inherently limited in our perspective. Yet in calling God Avinu Malkeinu, literally our Father, our King, we imagine a power in the universe that seamlessly unites infinite love and understanding and forgiveness with absolute fairness and objective assessment of our virtues and flaws. These high holy days, we are called upon to judge ourselves with love, to love ourselves and also to face the truth about our shortcomings and grave misdeeds. In our self-scrutiny, we strive to emulate the one before whom we stand at this season, the one who cannot be fooled by evasions or excuses, the one to whom we are responsible and accountable, the one who cherishes us for who we are and all we can become. Thus, tradition bids us approach this day with both solemnity and with joy, knowing that we will contemplate matters of life and death. And tradition reminds us as well that today we celebrate the world's creation and our own moral rebirth. We rise, if you are able, page 243 for Avinu Malkeinu.
Avinu Malkeinu, Chatanu Lefanecha. Avinu Malkeinu, Ein Lanu Melech, Ela Ata. Avinu Malkeinu, Ein Lanu Melech. Avinu Malkeinu, Chazani B'Shur Shleim Levanecha. Avinu Malkeinu Shlach B'Shur Shleim L'Cholei Mecha. Avinu Malkeinu Tzachvayim, Zikron Tov Levanecha. Avinu Malkeinu Kadveinu B'Sefer Chaim Tovim. Avinu Malkeinu Kadveinu B'Sefer Gvul V'Shua. Avinu Malkeinu Kadveinu B'Sefer Parnatzah V'Chalkala. Avinu Malkeinu Kadveinu B'Sefer Zchuriyot. Avinu Malkeinu Kadveinu B'Sefer Slicha U'Mechila. Avinu Malkeinu, Chaneinu Vaneinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Chaneinu Vaneinu, Ki Ein Banu Maasim. Aseh Imanu, Tzedaka v'chesed. Aseh imanu tzedaka v'chesed v'hoshienu. Avinu Malkeinu, Chaneinu Vaneinu. Avinu Malkeinu, Chaneinu Vaneinu, Ki Ein Banu Maasim. Aseh Imanu, Tzedaka v'chesed. Aseh Imanu, Tzedaka v'chesed, v'hoshienu.
And now we remain standing for Aleinu, page 246.
Aleinu l'shabeach ladon hakol, latei gedula liyotzeh b'reishit, shelo asanu k'goyei haratzot, v'lo samanu k'mishpachot ha'adama, shelo sam chelkeinu kahem, v'gahor aleinu kechol hamonam, v'anachnu korim, u'mishtachavim u'modim, Lifnei Melech Malchei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Shouldn't touch my ears. Kakatu b'tortech Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed. V'ne'emar v'haya Adonai lemelech al kol haaretz bayom hahu yiyeh Adonai echad u'shemo echad U'shemo echad.
You may be seated for a moment. In 2003, Yom Kippur fell on October 6th, the first Monday in October. Every year since 1975, the United States Supreme Court term had commenced on that first Monday in October. But in 2003, the opening was deferred. The story, according to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Zichrono Livracha, Yom Kippur fell on the first Monday of October. Justice Breyer and I went to the Chief Justice, Justice Rehnquist, and pointed that out. We said that the court should delay the opening in deference to the holiday. The chief was not persuaded. He said, "Why should we delay? We always hold our Friday conferences on Friday, even if it's Good Friday." So I replied to him, "So move that conference to Thursday. That would be fine for us." The chief was still not persuaded. Do you know what persuaded him? I explained to him that lawyers wait their entire career to appear before the Supreme Court. For many of them, it's once-in-a-lifetime chance to argue in the Supreme Court. What if a Jewish lawyer wanted to appear in court? We should not make that lawyer choose between observing his or her faith and appearing before the court. That persuaded him, and we changed the calendar. Before Mourner's Kaddish in tribute to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I offer you a poem written by a young woman named Hannah Senesh. A Hungarian Zionist immigrant to pre-World War II Palestine, she was parachuted into Hungary to help rescue her fellow Jews. She was caught and died by a firing squad. In her short life of just 23 years, she also wrote poetry, including Eli, Eli, which we've sometimes sung in our service, and a poem called Yesh Kochavim, There Are Stars, which aptly characterizes Justice Ginsburg's life and deeds. Wrote Senesh, "There are stars whose radiance is visible on earth, though they have long been extinct. There are people whose brilliance continues to light the world, even though they are no longer among the living. These lights are particularly bright when the night is dark. They light the way for humankind." We thank you, O God of life and love, for the gift of memory, which endows your children fashioned in your image with the godlike power to give immortality through love. Praise be you, O God, who enables your children to remember. Those of you who are in mourning or who observe your sight, rise now to recite the Mourner's Kaddish, page 247. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, v'yamad divrach yurtei v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael, v'agala v'zman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah v'arach le'olam ve'olmei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitalev v'yitalal shmei dekudsha b'rechu. Le'ela le'ela mikol gerchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechamata, da'amiran b'yoma v'imru Amen. Yehei shlama Rabbah min shmaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Oseh shalom b'ramav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. May the source of peace grant peace to those who are on earth where we need it. Just a few very brief announcements. The service tomorrow will start at 9:30 and Yisker will be recited at the end. I'll be teaching a Zoom class through Bethel starting after the holidays in October on us and them, Jews and non-Jews in Jewish texts, law, history, including a discussion of Jews and Black Lives Matter. We thank our technical assistants, Ivan Myers and Jonathan Eisenhold. Thank you very much. Without them, we wouldn't hear a word. And we thank the TI staff, Jevra Sherry Delaney, and our tech Shomrim, Judith Miller, Ralph Miller, not related to each other, Jessica Wiseman, Janice Mailer, Cheryl Gross-Glazer, Elliot Rosen, and Paula Flicker. A special shout out to those who are on this Zoom call from Australia, where it is Monday morning, and also to those who are in Argentina and Switzerland, and to all of you as well. We continue now with the Psalm for Elul, page 248. David
Adonai oriv yeshi mi'ira Adonai Malchai mi'achad mi'mayim. לא האמנתי לראות בטוב אדוני בארץ חיים, קווה אל אדוני חזק ויאמץ ליבך, וקווה אל אדוני. יגדל אלוהים חי וישתבח, נמצא ויענה אל מציאותו, אחד ואין יחיד כייחודו, נעלם וגם אין סוף ליחדותו, אין לו דמות הגוף ואינו גוף, לא נערוך אליו קדושתו. קדמון לכל דבר אשר נברא, ראשון ואין ראשית לראשיתו. הינו אדון עולם וכל נוצר, יורה גדולתו ומלכותו, שפע נבואתו נתנו אל אנשי סגולתו ותפארתו. לא קם בישראל כמו שעוד נביא ומביט את אמונתו. תורת אמת נתן לעמואל, על יד נביאו נאמן ביתו. לא יכל לפעל ולא ימיר דתו, לעולמים לזולתו. ויודע סתרנו, מביט לסוף דבר בקדמתו. גומר לאיש חסד כמפעלו, נותן לרשע רע כרישתו. ישלח לקץ ימין משיחנו, לפדות מחקקת ישועתו. מתים יחייל ברוב חסדו, ברוך עדי עד שם תהילתו. מתים יחייל ברוב חסדו, ברוך עדי עד שם תהילתו.
As we confront this challenging time, may we who are merely inconvenienced remember those whose lives are at stake. May we who have no risk factors remember those most vulnerable. May we who have the luxury of working from home remember those who must choose between preserving their health or making their rent. May we who have the flexibility to care for our children when their schools close remember those with no options. May we who have to cancel our trips remember those who have no place to go. May we who are losing our margin money in the tumult of the economic market remember those who have no margin at all. May we who settle in for a quarantine at home remember those who have no home. During this time when we cannot physically wrap our arms around each other, let us yet find ways to be the loving embrace of God to our neighbors, family, and friends. We continue with Adon Olam, page 249.
Adon Olam asher malach b'terem kol yitzir nivra, li'ed nasa b'chefto kol, azai melech shemo nikra, azai melech shemo nikra, ויחרי ככלות הכל לבדו, ימנוח נורא, והוא היה, והוא הווה, והוא יהיה בתפארה, והוא יהיה בתפארה, והוא אחד ואין שני להמשלה, להכבירה, בלי ראשית, בלי תכלית, ולא העוז והמשרה, ולא העוז והמשרה, והוא Eli, v'chai goali, v'tzor chavli, v'yevei tzara, v'honisi umanosli, minat kosi b'yom ekra, minat kosi b'yom ekra, b'yado, afkid ruchi b'yeit ishan, v'yaira, v'imruchi geviati, Adonai li, v'lo ira, Adonai li, v'lo ira.
On this Kol Nidre Eve, we pray, let our speech be pure and our promises sincere. Let our spoken words, every vow and every oath, be honest and well-intentioned. Let our words cause no pain, bring no harm, and never lead to shame, distrust, or fear. And if after honest effort we're unable to fulfill a promise, a vow, or an oath, may we be released from its obligation and forgiven for our failure. Let our speech be pure and our promises sincere. Give us the strength to keep our promises, the sacred vows of partners in marriage, the promises of love and care between parents and children, the promises of duty between citizens and country, the oaths of doctors, the sacred trust of teachers. Give us the strength to keep our promises to our friends and colleagues, to those who live with us and depend on us, to those who work for us and those for whom we work, to those who pray with us and those for whom we pray, to those we love and those we serve. Give us the courage to keep our promises to ourselves, to one another, and to future generations. I wish you all a Tzom Kal, an easy, meaningful fast, and Gemar Chatima Tova. May we all be sealed for a good new year.
Amen.
So always easy fast, right? She said easy fast.
We still on?